So I think one of the broad themes that I see, and I really can feel the pendulum beginning to swing back a little bit to a certain extent with Fit for 55 in the EU, but also and especially the Inflation Reduction Act, that there is a beginning recognition that there wasn't 5 or 6 years ago, that no one fuel or technology is going to dominate the future, and therefore policies, incentives, financial structures, the things that have been talked about today at the conference need to be broad-based and support these various technologies. So these are the common ones. They are by no means all inclusive, but they include everything that we're talking about today: sustainable aviation fuel, biomethane, super low CI, ethanol, renewable diesel, other advanced biofuels, synthetic fuels, electrofuels, and various forms of hydrogen. And actually refiners, who I think will bear a heavy burden of implementing these technologies, are looking at all of the above, all around the world, my research shows. They're all on the table, and what we know right now is what is implementable is, SAF, RNG, biodiesel, ethanol, and renewable diesel. They will be totally scalable. They're totally scalable now and will be in the next few years, followed by green, blue hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, and so forth. The point I want to make in all of this is that electrification is going to be an important part of the mix, but it's not and should not be the only option. Now, everyone in this room probably agrees with that. And my little subheader says, this will be a mix of fuels and technologies that will get us to net zero, and we must accept this. And everyone in this room is like, yeah, no doy, we get it. We do accept it. But there are others that do not. And we have a very strong NGO community, for example, in the US and EU also, who maybe don't accept that. And there are parts of the government that really still believe in the US and EU that electrification should be the only solution. And I think the reality is we need parallel multiple pathways to get us where we need to go, and that presents a lot of opportunity for you all and for other producers as well. So new types of policies, we're beginning to see some rapid transformation. Oh, there we go. Rapid transformation, rapid development of low carbon fuel options. I mean, we're really at the beginning point, but there's the policies and the structures are beginning to be put into place. These are just a few examples. You've heard about some of them today. Again, by no means all inclusive. IRA, Fit for 55, CO2 standards for light and now heavy duty vehicles, low carbon clean fuel standards, hydrogen roadmaps, and there are other policies as well. But what I want to point out here is what's not happening. One, the end of fossil fuel subsidies. They increased to a record US $1 trillion in 2022. So IRA, Fit for 55, yay. Fossil fuel subsidies, oh boy. And then the other important thing is carbon pricing. So there's carbon pricing in Canada, of course, but to really enable the types of technologies and projects that we've been talking about here today at the conference and around the world, whether it's any of those categories that I talked about before, what most comes up is, we really need a strong carbon price and we need it globally, and we really don't have that. And the number that's typically cited is US $100 per ton, and there's only a few countries that you see there, Liechtenstein, Switzerland, Uruguay, that have those in place. And then I think the other part of this that really gets to is governments want net zero, but I think they largely want to avoid the political and consumer pain of getting there. And this came up, I think, in an earlier session about, consumer choice. I think that governments, particularly in the US and around the world, haven't really leveled with the public about what it will take to get to net zero and what that will actually mean for them. And what we see is a mixture of support and then the reality check, or just plain flat out backlash. And I think that's something that really needs to be looked at and kind of controlled for. And I think it's probably going to have to be the collective industries that do it. And I'm happy to go further with that. Last point, the road to electrification in North America, EU, and other places will be bumpy. It already is. And I think that's part of this pendulum swinging back. You know, and I don't say that because I don't support electrification. I actually work a lot on electrification, but it's not the silver bullet. And I think we're kind of maybe coming down off the hype cycle a little bit, which is a natural progression. There really are some serious challenges that go from putting in the charging infrastructure to, you know, the impact of interest rates, higher vehicle costs, and, you know, trying to appeal to a broader base of consumers that are not affluent. And it's their primary mode of transportation. So we will need electrification. It's not the only solution. We will need low carbon fuels, and there'll be a bridge to, you know, from the light and heavy duty sectors to aviation and marine going forward. And this chart from IEA shows that. So with that, I'll hand it over to Michael.
I'm still mic'd here. I'll take my chances with this one. Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for having me. I am Michael Wolinetz. I am a partner and senior consultant with Navius Research. We're an independent energy economic consulting firm, and I'm going to share a bit of the work we do today that's particularly relevant to this conference. In particular, of course, the subject here is talking about the role of non-ZEV transport and net zero. So I'll start with where we are now. This is a bit of data that comes out one of the annual reports we do called Biofuels in Canada. And it's really a retrospective on what we've done with regards to clean fuels consumption in Canada, what the impact has been in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. We delve into costs, as well as why that's happening. We spend a lot of time just talking about the policies that are behind all of that. And it really is the policies that are driving low carbon fuel demand in Canada. This is all happening because of the policies. And over the last more than 10 years, we've had sort of the patchwork of provincial and federal fuel blending mandates, as well as the BC LCFS. And that's what's been driving this. And where we are right now, so for 2022, and this is an estimate because the data is not yet complete, some of it's preliminary, some of it's estimated. It looks like we're now, for the first time, approaching 8% by volume renewable fuels and gasoline and 4% by volume in diesel. Just to put that in comparison, we've also got sort of a representation of where we're at with electric vehicles in terms of equivalent amounts of gasoline displaced, and that's just around 1% right now. We've got about 1 to 1.5% of the vehicles on the road in Canada, light-duty vehicles that is, already electrified. In terms of greenhouse gas emissions, we're now approaching an annual impact of about 7 megatons per year avoided because of these renewable fuels. And what we've been seeing, certainly in the jurisdictions that measure carbon intensity, is year-over-year reductions. So the signal from the policies that is asking for lower carbon intensity fuels is pulling them into the market, and that's resulting in more GHG abatement per unit of fuel consumed. On the other side of the coin, so on supply, of course, I'm going to say North American policy is quite evidently supporting supply. More so in the US and Canada. There's a lot of proposals for Canada. The big difference in the US is there's a huge amount of things that are already built or being built. So that's sort of where we are right now. It's a great start, but not to get too excited. It's a long way towards what we need to do to get to net zero. I'll sort of riff on what Tammy said. She said there should be a variety of fuels and pathways. I'll go one step further, is there has to be a variety of fuels and pathways that get us to net zero. One of the big limitations that comes from the modeling we do, and this is modeling where we take everything we know about policies, everything we know about technologies and fuels, how consumers and businesses make decisions, and we put all of that into our model and we simulate what the impact of policies are. We simulate the impact of currently legislated policies, and we simulate the impact of announced policies and even emerging policies, hypothetical policies that are strong enough to get us to net zero. And what we see is that achieving 2030 and 2040 targets, you can't wait for vehicle transportation fleets to turn over. There's a really, really big societal cost to forcing people or businesses to retire their vehicles early. And you know, we've got targets coming up in 7 years. We've got interim targets coming up in 17 years. You need some way of decarbonizing the existing infrastructure. So the figure I'm showing you, this comes from some of our public work. This is the Canada Energy Dashboard that Navius Research has released. And this is a custom view of the data. If you visit it, you can download the data. You can do whatever you want with it. But this is sort of showing the range across all net zero scenarios of low carbon biofuels in the transportation sector. And what we're seeing is to get to the 2030 targets, and this is a net zero scenario where we hit our 2030 targets, our 2040 targets, and we get to net zero by 2050, you need a rapid scale up in the quantity of renewable fuels being used in the transportation sector. And the big part of that is just sort of the interim necessity to decarbonize the existing fleet of vehicles. By the time we get to 2050, it's a 4 to 10-fold increase in demand for these low carbon fuels. To put that in perspective, we're talking something along the order of 15 to 20 billion liters. These fuels are really key to decarbonizing the light-duty fleet in the interim, and you know, we've got policy pushing us towards zero-emissions vehicles. But outside of that, they're of the utmost importance, really, for what I would say non-road transportation is. So aviation, rail, marine, as well as heavy-duty transport. It's not that there won't be zero-emissions vehicles in these modes. It's just that they will be perhaps niches, important niches at best by the time we get to 2040 and 2050. In particular, low-carbon fuels address some of the key challenges with vehicle life. These non-road vehicles and heavy-duty vehicles are especially long-lived. If you look at a train, a locomotive, they can last for decades and decades. They don't get retired, they get repowered, remanufactured. You can keep them for just about forever if you want to. And so the stock turns on very slowly. There's less of an opportunity to get zero-emissions vehicles into the fleets. Same goes for marine vehicles and to some extent aviation as well. Low-carbon fuels also address some really major challenges with the nascent ZEV systems. We had someone from Boeing this morning showing the size of the cryogenic storage on an airplane. So that's a really big problem, and it's a similar problem for rail as well. The cost of energy storage, whether it be hydrogen or electricity, is a really, really big problem for these vehicles. They have very long ranges, they operate under very severe duty cycles, and they have pretty extreme reliability requirements. So no one wants planes to fall out of the sky. No one wants a train to lose power and have another lac mégantic, for example. What feeds into all of this, and the realities of it, are the current policy approaches. If you look at what California is doing, and California is an absolute leader in this regard in terms of zero-emissions vehicles for things other than light-duty cars and trucks, you'll see that there's a lot of space for the continuation of internal combustion engine vehicles. We've got the advanced clean truck regulations, as well as the in-use locomotive rules. And both of those, on the surface, have some pretty strong requirements for zero-emission vehicle sales into those fleets. But if you dig a little deeper, those policies, they're pushing very hard on zero-emissions vehicles. But again, they are reasonable in that they leave a lot of space for ongoing and long-term use of low-carbon fuels within internal combustion engine vehicles. And so, I mean, just come back to really the headline point here is that these fuels are a necessary and integral part of getting to net zero. I'll pass it to.
Oh, thanks, Michael. Oh, it works. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And Jeff, thank you so much for the invite. And I want to say thank you, Doug, for hosting us today, because I think this is something I'm very passionate about. My name is Bob Larocque. I'm president and CEO of the Canadian Fuels Association, and our members produce 95% of all the fuel in Canada right now. And by January, 90% of all the low-carbon fuels that we're producing. And why I mean January is because we have imminent renewable diesel production in Canada, in Prince George, and also in Newfoundland with the Broad Renewables. So we're hoping that those are going to start up, and we're going to finally have renewable diesel production in Canada, so we don't have to rely on importing for the U.S. Oh. Sorry.
You broke it.
See, that's why I didn't hit it. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go by memory because I see a blank screen there. What I want to talk about is a little bit where we are today. So you can see that we are investing coast to coast to coast. Some of them are in operations right now. And the other thing I want to highlight from our members is something changed from renewable fuel targets of blending ethanol and biodiesel to carbon intensity. And I see Michael here from BC who first brought that up. And in the clean fuel regulation, and it's so important from a bioeconomy perspective, depending on the feedstock. Our conversation now are not on how much we're going to blend. Our conversation is how low can you get on your fuel? What's your carbon intensity of your fuel? So if you want to work with any of our companies, that's going to be pretty much the first questions they're going to ask. For us, why it's also really important is because we're making changes at the refinery. So you see the carbon capture and storage. The hydrogen that we heard before at lunch, bringing that in, like for one of our refineries, for example, will reduce our carbon footprint. We're also seeing using renewable natural gas at Irving, out east. And then on top of that, we're investing a lot of money into traditional low carbon fuels, which would be ethanol, and also co-processing and renewable diesel. Co-processing also, first company in Canada, Parkland, is doing it. It's actually you're bringing your feedstock at the beginning of the refinery, co-processing it, and then the product that comes out looks like diesel, but actually has a low carbon blend in it of about 5%. And we think that that is also the future. So we're looking for a lot of potential partners that could be bringing into the refinery, and then we use the word drop in all the time, but that's kind of where we're going to do. And I know, Doug, we have all the numbers on jobs and total investment, but there's one thing I want to also add is, just on an order of magnitude, we hear 2 billion SAF, whatever. We produce 100 billion liters a year. That's what we need to be replaced in the transportation sector. So we are looking at either jet fuel or whatever. We all have to work together. I completely agree. I think there's a place for renewable diesel for long-haul transport, but there's also a place for sustainable aviation fuel. So I completely agree with the rest of the group here that all fuels, including electricity, is going to be important in the future. But what's going on as far as, I'm going to touch on that, what's keeping me awake at night, it's these policies and those incentives, and I think we're going to touch a little bit more, but I will answer any questions on it. And what I mean by comprehensive package is I think we do have a lot on the regulatory side, and hopefully, and yes, we are a strong supporter of the clean fuel regulation. But like everyone was saying earlier, what happens if we do have a change of government? I'm sure a lot of you in the room have heard axe to tax, and some of you have heard CFR's Carbon Tax 2.0. So we are working with the Conservative party, and we're looking at, look, you need to understand that this is a good policy. We need to keep it. It's good for Canada, for GHG, but we'll see where that goes. We have also a lot of different provincial mandates that are being updated all the time. And low carbon fuel standard that we have to work with, and also some sector roadmap. I think Jeff was here today. We're part of that. We're working hand in hand. Someone was asking me, are you supportive of what Jeff is saying? Absolutely. I think we have to work together, and we're absolutely supportive of what he's doing. So I think that's the collaboration we're talking about. But on the incentive side, I still remember it was August last year around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I got 3 phone calls from my 3 biggest company, and they said, Bob, what just happened? I said, what are you talking about? He says, the IRA. The IRA changed everything. The IRA absolutely changed where we're at. We had one of our companies that actually delayed or even canceled a project in Burnaby and Vancouver, not just because of the IRA, but the IRA was one reason for it. We're seeing our canola or feedstock, that was a $600 million investment in Vancouver or Burnaby. The feedstock right now, the canola, I'm going there tonight, it is going to the United States. The IRA is sucking in the investment, and Canada is very slow to respond. We had a consultation in the budget 2023. We're really, really hopeful that the Canadian government is going to be announcing something this month that will touch on biofuels. And what I mean by biofuels, I mean ethanol, renewable diesel, sustainable aviation, hydrogen. It doesn't really matter. It just be based on your CI. 2, the government has been very slow on implementing the ITCs. I think I lost it. The hydrogen ITC, we heard, we're going to get a document coming out shortly, another round of consultation. I don't see the hydrogen ITCs to be actually live or to be used until April to June 2024, and that's assuming we don't get a lot of different comments to finance after this round. So like you said, Tammy, it's moving in the US, and Canada's a year or two behind, and we need to absolutely increase that speed. And I'll leave it there to Doug, and then you can continue.
Thanks, Bob. So get your questions ready. I'm just going to do a couple more quick slides, and then we'll turn into the Q&A part. So this is Advanced Biofuels Canada. All of our members are noted there. The key thing are the documents on the right. Michael's Biofuels in Canada report came out last Tuesday. On Thursday, we released Canada's Clean Fuel Strategy, which is our contribution of specific recommendations into the into the biofuels consultation that came out of Budget 23. There's great resources there for data visualization and understanding our markets. Here's the prize. This is what we're looking at in terms of the build-out of clean fuel production capacity in Canada. Bob says 8 to 10 billion. I think it's more like 10 to 15 billion between now and 2030. Each of those different colors is a different project, and we can scale up this sector from just over 4 billion liters of annual production capacity to 11 plus billion by 2030. With that investment, that also includes investment in infrastructure, which is desperately needed in Canada. We have not, even under the renewable fuel standards in place since 2010, we're still behind schedule in terms of tankage and dispensing equipment and ability to move our fuels around. And on top of that, then we also have innovation investments as well. So 10 to 15 billion, and we would be in a position where we'd be able to meet the anticipated demand that under our high case for biofuels under the CFR and the provincial fuel regs. So what would that cost us? The recommendations that we put forward in the Clean Fuel Strategy pinpoint going after participation in the clean technology manufacturers ITC, an investment tax credit of 30%. It starts on January 1st next year. That's what we're calling for. And we're saying if you're building a low carbon intensity fuel production facility as defined in the CFR, your assets, your capital expenditures would be eligible to participate in that. In addition, the IRA legislation has a clean fuel production credit, which is a production tax credit. Direct subsidy for making low carbon fuels in the US starts January 1st, 25, goes till at least the end of 27. US subsidies have a tendency to linger for 15, 20 years before they're finally sunset. And so we've been working with Bob and Finance and Enercan and ECCC through the biofuels consultation to analyze that one in particular. There's different mechanisms around the CFR credits, either an incentive or a guaranteed price or a contract for differences. There's different ways people have been describing it, but essentially we need to stand up something that's going to go head-to-head with the subsidy that the US-based producers will be getting. If we succeed and we build out these assets, we're going to add somewhere in the order of 20,000 new jobs. We're going to attain 18 million tons of reductions a year instead of 7, where Michael said we were at. The cost of the measures would sit somewhere in the $8 to $10 billion range. Depends on the longevity of the programs and exactly what type of design they come up with. And an interesting thing that came out of the modeling that Michael did to analyze the costs and the effectiveness of these recommendations we put forward is that by 2030, we're adding $5 billion now of economic output, GDP growth from that investment. So very strong paybacks and benefits to this sector growing over the course of the next 7 years. So please fire away with questions. I'm going to start with questions that I've already set up with the panel, and I want to just drive right into risk right off the bat. I'll skip over the first area and get after the risk question because I think it is the most important issue that our sector faces is the policy risks of getting fuel regulations, getting carbon pricing, getting compliance credits, and those things settled. So, Tammy, I'll start with you, and let's just talk about the IRA. And is the U.S. actually going to get it done? Like we're supposed to be getting some guidance around SAF credits. We're supposed to be getting guidance around the clean fuel production credit. We got hydrogen, SAF, CCS, everybody betting that the IRA is going to work. Is it going to work? And then while you're at it, What's going to happen in November next year, and how's that going to affect investments in our sector?
Yikes. No, I'm kidding. I'm joking.
Yeah, what's going to happen in November?
So the Internal Revenue Service, division of our Treasury in the U.S., is scheduled to come out with guidance, the implementation guidance for hydrogen, very important, and a SAF tax credit and the wider clean fuel production tax credit by the end of the year. Well, that's what I've heard. I think they're on a schedule. If we don't get it in December, and usually these things come out December 24th, I am not kidding. We're all sitting down to dinner, and yeah, that's happened many times. If it doesn't come out in December, it has to come out by March. And the reason is, as you indicate, it's pegged to the election season, which really kicks up with the bulk of the caucuses, really starting in February, but really kicking off in March. So, generally, once the real presidential season kicks off, really nothing happens on the policy front, or whatever needs to be finalized and promulgated needs to be done by then. So yes, I think we will get guidance. I think it will come out no later than March of 2024, because the idea is to get people to start implementing. And if it can come out in December, so much the better. People will begin to make final investment decisions. Things like, capital will start presumably flowing. And, once the genie is out of the bottle, no matter who is president, it's really hard to jam the genie back in the bottle once, money is going out. People are getting jobs, which was Make America Great Again, jobs and things, economic development. Shovels are going in the ground. So the idea is, to really get this going so that it really makes it difficult to be undone. So Republicans have talked a lot of smack about the Inflation Reduction Act, but here's the bottom line, and they can do anything. I mean, as you've seen in the U.S., they are capable of anything, and it's a little disturbing. But the reality is 60% of the slated project investment for the IRA is going to Republican states. Republican jobs to Republican voters in those states. So do I think the IRA will be undone? No, I do not. Do I think that there will be some, jockeying around and, continued rhetoric? Yes. Do I think that there might be some, non-harmful, and I don't really know what those are, but it's not like, let's roll back CCS, let's roll back, H2. It'll be like holding hearings and giving people a hard time, is my estimate, because at the end of the day, I think there is some recognition that no matter what you think about climate, this is as much about economic development as it is anything else. And for Canada and for other countries, I get asked a lot that question, but I also get asked, the trade issue and what's going to happen, and is the U.S. going to moderate? And, I keep saying, maybe there'll be something. I don't really know what that will be, but these people knew what they were doing when they enacted the legislation. They did it with intention, and they did it with purpose. And so that means governments will really need to step in to act to help, industries like the folks who are sitting in here.
I'm hearing a real
Hey,
giddy
Doug, I
up
was gonna jump
Canada
in a little bit,
message to
too.
that.
I just want to say one thing about the
Fire away.
IRA from risk, and a lot of people may not know that, but it's really important for Canada for fuel security and reliability, because a U.S.-based renewable diesel who gets the IRA brings that fuel to Canada. They also get the clean fuel regulation, because the clean fuel regulation does not matter where the fuel was made. The IRA is you have to make the fuel in the United States to get that credit. So there's a big, big trade issue if Canada does not respond very shortly on this thing. So that's the other risk, is that once the investments are going to be made in the States and they use our feedstock, Right now, we're 100% reliable of fuel on Canadian companies. In 2030, 15% of our fuel might be coming from the US. And do we want to be in that position? That's what we're up against right now.
So, Bob, let's stay with you for a second. The one argument is the carbon tax has to be repealed. That's being put forward by Pierre Poilievre. And his second argument is that the clean fuel regulation is a second carbon tax, and it's just piling on an already hurting consumer and is redundant. What happens to the investments in your side of the sector and the refiners that if the carbon tax is repealed, how does it affect those investments? And then after that, add on what happens if the CFR is repealed as well?
So I just want to, first of all, I just want to start that the affordability question is real in Canada. I just think, and it's probably real in the rest of the world. So I don't want to diminish that Canadians are struggling today the way they were 3 years ago. So I just want to say that before I say anything, is we are aware and that's an issue. From a carbon tax perspective, basically it's what you pay at the pump and then you get your climate actions return. Doug, that does not really impact our investments. To be honest with you, that tax gets put on when you're fueling in your tank, and then after that, Canadians get a rebate back. So in my mind, they can do whatever they want. The clean fuel regulation, that's a different story. The clean fuel regulation has a credit market in it. It is valued, it's like the BC, either through a credit market or Part 3 agreements. It's very similar, and that would have a significant impact investments on Canada. And the other thing that people don't understand is the IRA, you saw that, but there's something else called the RINs in the United States. And our CFR is, in a way, compatible with the RINs in the US or the BC market, the California market. If we lose the CFR on top of not matching the IRA, it's going to have a significant impact on it.
Yeah, and one of the main reasons for the CFR being such an important tool in Canada is that it has a credit market now.
Exactly.
It's given Canada a national credit market. We're a small country, nobody really lives here, and we're spread out. And so provincial regulations with a credit market, God bless British Columbia, thank you, but it's still too small. And a CFR credit facility allows the entire sector to respond. Feedstocks, technologies, fuel production, where do you put it? So that's a key aspect. And I think, to an earlier discussion today about the aviation sector and whether or not voluntary action is going to take us through to hitting our climate goals, if there's one thing we've learned in the biofuel sector in the last 20 years, it's voluntary actions do not equal emission reductions. Mandates create emission reductions. Period. You just have to say, here's the demand signal. It can either be blending or a CI signal or both. Those have proven to be very effective in combo. So all of our low carbon fuel markets are built on top of renewable fuel standards. We can do the same in the aviation sector. We can do the same in the marine sector. You can scale it up so that there's time to respond. And these are, as you say, long life assets, and they're going to be around for 40 to 50 years. We need to start setting those signals now is our position. Michael, drag you back into it. We're talking, let's go back to carbon taxation and compliance credits and get your thoughts on is it double jeopardy for the consumer, or are compliance credits, or is the CFR really a second carbon tax, and how do they work? Go after my comment about the credit market being so important. Is that really the case, and why?
Yeah, well, I would say, so first of all, it's not a double carbon tax. The policies like the CFR or any other performance standard do not tax the full carbon intensity of the fuel. So in that sense, you're not paying a carbon tax plus another carbon tax. The carbon cost is a signal, direct signal to the fuel supply sectors to supply those low carbon fuels. And the consumer ultimately does bear some cost if those fuels are more expensive. But it's not, a credit price times carbon intensity of the fuel. If you get your carbon tax set up properly, in theory, the combination of the two policies can help protect the consumer. So if you've got a greater supply of low carbon fuels in your fuel, and you are not also applying the carbon tax to that low carbon fuel, which unfortunately is not the case necessarily. But if you have it set up like that, then you will in fact pay less carbon tax because you are consuming a low carbon fuel. So in one sense, you've got the carbon tax that's designed to provide a very broad signal to consumers to change behavior, change technologies. On the other side, you've got policies like the clean fuel regulations that are a signal, a transformative change signal to industry, to change what they're doing, to innovate.
So why are the BC compliance credits so expensive, and where do you think the CFR credit market is going to go?
I'll look into my crystal ball, and we do have one in the office. So the BC policy is really different from the CFR because it's 10 years ahead. They've got a minus 30% carbon intensity target by 2030. And contrast that with the CFR, which I'm going to get this wrong, but it's on the order of like minus 12, minus 13%. So in that regard, you're shooting at two different targets, and you're going to end up with different credit prices. So my prediction is we are seeing high credit prices in BC because right now it's a signal to the market to get more compliance into the market. In particular, what's happening is a lot more renewable diesel. Whereas the clean fuel regulations is going to, in my opinion, end up in a situation where there's a lot of compliance coming in from other sources. So there's going to be an increasing amount of compliance from electric vehicles, even though there are provisions to try to mitigate that from flooding the credit market. But the longer time span and the lower target is sort of going to combine, I think, to result in a lower credit price than we're seeing with BC right now.
Okay, Bob, we're going to go back to you. There's a question from the audience about whether or not there's going to be better incentives for low carbon intensity fuels. We spent our summer vacations doing the biofuels consultation this year. That was extra special. What did we learn, and what do we think we're going to get? There's going to be a fall economic statement some point in November. Tammy's telling us that the IRA is going to land and work, so we better giddy up and get going. Are we going to see something in the fall? Is it next budget? And what do you think we're going to see for fuel production?
So, look, our expectations from everyone we've talked to, from government officials to departments, is we're hoping for some kind of a signal in the fall economic statement. Sorry, it's supposed to be this week, but I think there's been some delays with what's been happening politically the last couple of weeks. It won't be a budget. It won't be like you will be getting 30%, blah, 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 blah. But we're expecting, Doug, to have some kind of capital will be supported through an ITC, for example, and maybe support Canadian-made low-carbon fuel production. What does that mean for you and I and a bunch of other people who've worked hard on this in the summer is I do believe at the end of the day in Budget 2024, there will be an ITC for low-carbon fuels. For those of you in the room who got, I have to be careful what word I say here, where some biomass was not included, we are feedstock agnostic. So for me, as long as you meet the CI of the ITC, it doesn't matter if you're using wood, canola, it doesn't really matter, you're included. So we're pushing hard compared to the other ITCs. And I think, Doug, they'll be creative and use the clean fuel regulation to provide some kind of an incentives on the production side. What is that going to look like? We're not sure yet, but that's what we're hopeful will happen.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment because it's, I think we're sort of like in the IRA euphoria in the U.S. and in Canada and the EU and Korea, South Korea and Japan. It's, oh my God, what's going to happen to us? But I think, we need to parse through the euphoria a little bit. Yes, we need, the implementation guidance from the IRS, but I'm already seeing headwinds for projects. I don't think it's all going to be as rosy and easy as it may sound in the media. One example is, or one issue is all the grid electricity that is needed, transmission and such, to enable the support of green hydrogen in the U.S. We're far away from that. Another example is simply permitting timelines, which can be, 4 to 10 years for projects. That really has not changed significantly. And then, NGO opposition. You know, my research shows that NGO opposition has been really successful in killing, you know, a host of different types of projects, low carbon fuels, and most recently, you know, carbon capture and storage projects. So I think it's important to parse through all that. It's not all sunshine and roses, and I think there's going to be some difficulties down the road in the U.S., and maybe it behooves, you know, the policymakers here in Canada to watch for that and to design policies to avoid that, so that Canada can, you know, sort of, you know, make the most of its own opportunities here.
And that's all the time we have, folks. Thanks very much for your attention, and thanks for your time.